You put your hands on that rifle again, and I will end your career right here on this floor." General Thomas Whitaker's roar tore through the weapons bay as he grabbed the young sergeant and hurled her back against the steel rack, his face purple with rage. "You are a fraud, a disgrace, and you have no right to breathe near a 50 caliber guards. I want her in a cell." The soldiers froze. Everyone waited for the girl to crumble, to cry, to beg for mercy. Instead, Claire Bennett slowly pushed herself off the rack, straightened her uniform, looked a 3-star general dead in the eyes, and said 4 quiet words that stopped him cold. Before we go on, if you love stories about quiet heroes who are underestimated and then prove everyone wrong, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and follow this story and all the way to the end. And leave a comment telling me the city where you are watching from right now, because I would truly love to see how far this story travels across the country and around the world. Now let us begin. "I did, sir." That was what she said. 3 simple words spoken without heat, without fear, without the slightest tremble in her voice. "I gave myself permission, sir." General Thomas Whitaker had spent 34 years in the United States Army. He had commanded men in places that never appeared on any map. He had stood in rooms where the fate of thousands hung on a single decision. He had looked into the faces of hardened colonels and watched them go pale. And in all those years, in all those rooms, he had never once heard a junior enlisted soldier answer a general with such flat, unshakable calm. For a moment, he did not know what to do with it. "Say that again, Sergeant," he said quietly. The quiet was worse than the shouting, and everyone in the room knew it. "I authorized myself to inspect the rifle, sir," she repeated. "I am cleared for this weapon. If the general wants to verify that I understand completely, I would want to verify it too." Whitaker took 2 slow steps forward. The other soldiers in the bay had stopped breathing. There was Private First Class Reyes near the ammunition locker, frozen with a cleaning rod still in his hand. There was Sergeant Dolan by the workbench, staring at the floor as if he could disappear into it. And there was this young woman standing beside a Barrett M82A 150 caliber rifle, one of the most restricted and most powerful weapons on the entire installation, as though she were standing beside her own kitchen table. "What is your name?" the general asked. "Staff Sergeant Claire Bennett, sir." "And how long have you been at Redstone Mountain, Sergeant Bennett?" 2 weeks, sir." 2 weeks. Whitaker let the words hang in the cold air. "You have been on my installation for 14 days, and you have decided that you are cleared to handle a weapon that half my senior officers cannot sign out without 3 separate approvals." "Yes, sir. That is correct." The honesty of it stopped him again. She was not arguing. She was not begging. She was simply telling him the truth and letting the truth stand on its own 2 feet, and there was something about that which made the hair on the back of his neck rise. "Sergeant Dolan," the general said without turning his head, "did you see this soldier remove that rifle from the rack?" Dolan swallowed hard. "Sir, she had paperwork, sir." "Paperwork?" "Yes, sir. She showed me a clearance form when she came in this morning. It looked real, sir." "It looked real." Whitaker turned slowly toward the older sergeant. "Do you know what the penalty is for allowing unauthorized access to a restricted weapon?" "Sergeant Dolan." "Yes, sir, I do, sir." "Then why is that rifle in her hands?" Dolan opened his mouth and nothing came out. And it was Claire who answered for him in that same steady voice, refusing to let another soldier take the fall for something she considered her own responsibility. "Because I showed him valid documentation, sir. Sergeant Dolan followed procedure. If there is a problem with my access, the problem is with my file, not with his judgment. I would ask the general to remember that when this is sorted out." Whitaker stared at her. In 34 years, he had learned to read soldiers the way some men read weather. He could tell the ones who were lying by the way their eyes drifted up and to the left. He could tell the ones who were terrified by the sweat on their upper lip. He could tell the frauds, the fakers, the ones who wore courage like a borrowed coat that did not fit. Claire Bennett was none of those things, and that frightened him more than a lie ever could. "Put the rifle down," he said. "Slowly, clear it first." She did not put it down immediately. Instead, with movements so smooth and so practiced that they looked almost bored, she dropped the magazine, locked the bolt to the rear, visually and physically inspected the chamber, then held the weapon out for his inspection, with the action open exactly as regulation demanded, exactly the way a soldier who had done it 10,000 times would do it without thinking. Whitaker looked at the open chamber. Then he looked at her hands. They were steady. Not the practiced steadiness of a soldier trying to impress a general. The natural steadiness of someone whose hands had simply stopped shaking a very long time ago. "Set it on the bench," he said. She set it down. "Now come with me." The walk from the weapons bay to the administrative building was 140 yards across an open yard, and General Whitaker did not speak for a single step of it. He wanted her to sweat. That was an old trick, one he had used on stubborn officers for decades. Give a person enough silence in their own imagination, will do your interrogating for you. It did not work on Claire Bennett. She walked beside him with her chin level, and her eyes forward matching his pace, exactly showing no more anxiety than a person waiting for a bus. When they reached his office and he told her to stand at ease in front of his desk, she stood at ease. When he sat down and pulled up the base personnel system on his computer, she waited without a word. "I'm going to look at your file," he said. "And when I do, I'm going to find out that somebody made a very expensive mistake somewhere in your paperwork. And then you and I are going to have a very different conversation. Do you understand me, Sergeant?" "I understand you perfectly, sir." He turned to the screen. He typed her name. He entered his own command-level credentials that could open almost any door in the United States Army, and the screen stopped him cold. Whitaker leaned toward the monitor and read it again because he was certain he had misread it the first time. The file was there, but almost all of it was black. Name Bennett Claire M. That was visible. Rank, date of grade, blood type, all visible. And then below that, line after line after line of redaction. Training history classified. Unit assignments classified. Deployment record classified. Awards and decorations redacted. See restricted addendum. Prior commanding officers access denied at your clearance level. Access denied at his clearance level. Thomas Whitaker had a security clearance that most human beings on this planet would never come within 100 miles of. He had read files that could have started wars. And this system, his own system on his own base, was telling a 3-star general that he was not cleared to know where this 23-year-old staff sergeant had spent the last several years of her life. He sat back slowly in his chair. "Sergeant Bennett," he said, and his voice had changed. The anger was gone from it, now replaced by something more careful. "Who is your reporting officer?" "I am not permitted to say, sir. You are standing in my office, on my base. I am a general officer, and I am ordering you to tell me who your reporting officer is." "With respect, General, my orders came with specific restrictions. I cannot disclose my reporting chain to anyone below a certain access level. If the general's clearance is sufficient, the system will show it. If the system will not show it to the general, then I am not permitted to override the system by speaking." "Sir." He stared at her for a long moment. "You are telling me," he said slowly, "that there is a level of clearance above a 3-star general that would be required to know where you have been." "I am telling the general that I follow my orders exactly as they were given to me. That is all I am able to say." And here was the strange thing, the thing that Whitaker would think about for a long time afterward. She did not say it with arrogance. She did not enjoy it. If anything, there was something almost apologetic in her eyes, as though she genuinely wished she could give him what he was asking for, and simply was not allowed. He rubbed his hand across his jaw, and then he noticed it. On her uniform, small and dark and easy to miss, was a badge he did not recognize. It was not any qualification the badge he had ever seen. Not a marksmanship badge, not a combat badge, nothing from any manual he had ever studied. It was matte black, roughly the size of a dog tag, and beneath it, engraved in tiny, precise numerals, was a single figure, 3,200. "What is that?" he said, "on your chest?" "That badge. I do not recognize it." For the first time in the entire conversation, something flickered across Claire's face. Just for an instant. Something that was not fear and was not pride. Something closer to grief. "It is a unit marking, sir," she said quietly. "What does the number mean?" She hesitated. "Sergeant, what does 3,200 mean?" "Meters, sir." The word landed in the office and did not move. Whitaker sat very still. He knew better than almost anyone alive what that number meant when it was attached to a soldier and a .50 caliber rifle. He had spent enough time around snipers to understand the brutal, unforgiving mathematics of long-distance shooting. He knew that most trained military marksmen operated effectively out to 800 meters. He knew that the truly exceptional ones, the ones who spent their whole careers behind a scope, could reach out past 1,000 past 1,200 on a good day with perfect conditions and a great deal of luck. He knew that the longest confirmed combat shots in recorded history, the ones that made headlines and were studied in schools and talked about with something close to reverence, lived in the range of 2,000 to 3,000 meters, and that only a tiny handful of human beings on the entire planet had ever accomplished such a thing. And here was a 23-year-old girl 2 weeks on his base standing in his office wearing a badge that claimed 3,200. That is not possible, he said. It came out before he could stop it. The general is free to believe that, sir. Do you understand what you are telling me? Do you understand how few people in the world could even attempt a shot at that distance? We are talking about a number that puts you past almost every confirmed record that has ever been logged. And you want me to believe that you did this at your age and that there is no record of it anywhere I am allowed to see. I do not need the general to believe anything, Claire said. The general asked me what the number meant. I answered honestly. What the general does with that answer is not my decision, sir. He should have thrown her out of his office. That was the sensible thing. That was what the old Thomas Whitaker, the one who had walked into that weapons bay an hour ago, ready to end a young soldier's career, would have done. Any reasonable general would have flagged the file, called in the investigators, and let somebody above his pay grade sort out the mystery. But he did not do that. Because in 34 years, Thomas Whitaker had built his entire reputation on one thing, not on his temper, not on his rank, on his ability to know a real soldier when he saw one. And every instinct he had, every hard-won piece of judgment he had earned in 3 decades of service, was screaming at him that the young woman standing in front of him was the real thing, and that if he threw her out and buried this, he would spend the rest of his life wondering. Sit down, he said. Sir, that was not a request, Sergeant. Sit down. She sat. He leaned forward, folded his hands on the desk, and looked at her the way he had not looked at anyone in a very long time. Not as a commander looking at a subordinate, as one human being trying to understand another. I'm going to be honest with you, Sergeant Bennett, he said, because I think you have been honest with me even when it cost you nothing to lie. An hour ago, I was ready to have your stripes. I thought you were a fraud. I have seen 100 frauds, and I know exactly what they look like, and every one of them would have crumbled the moment I raised my voice. You did not crumble. That tells me something. But your file tells me nothing, and I do not like being told nothing on my own base. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think very carefully about how you answer it. Are you what that badge says you are? Claire looked at him for a long moment. Yes, sir, she said. I am. Then prove it. The words were out of his mouth before he had fully decided to say them. But once they were said, he did not take them back. You heard me, Sergeant. Your file will not tell me the truth. Your reporting chain will not tell me the truth. So I'm going to do the only thing left that I know how to do. I am going to put you behind a rifle, and I am going to give you a target, and I am going to watch with my own 2 eyes. And if you are what you say you are, I will find out. And if you are not, if that badge is a lie, then I will find that out too, and you will answer for every second of it. Do you accept that? For the first time, something like the ghost of a smile touched the corner of Claire Bennett's mouth. Not amusement, something quieter, something that looked almost like relief. Yes, sir, she said. I accept that. News of the general's decision moved through Redstone Mountain the way fire moves through dry grass. By that afternoon, everyone on the installation knew that some mystery sergeant, some kid who had shown up out of nowhere 2 weeks ago, had talked back to a 3-star general and somehow gotten herself an official long-range shooting evaluation instead of a court-martial. And the opinions came fast and loud and mostly cruel. In the non-commissioned officers club that evening, Master Sergeant Dale Corrigan set down his coffee and laughed out loud when he heard. 3,200 meters, Corrigan said. You know what that is? That is farther than anything I have ever seen in 26 years. That is farther than the best shooters in the entire country can hit. And I am supposed to believe that some 23-year-old girl who nobody has ever heard of can do it. Come on, somebody is playing a joke on the old man. Maybe she has connections, said a younger sergeant beside him. Oh, she has connections, all right, Corrigan said. That is exactly what she has. Somebody upstairs is looking out for her, and she strolls onto this base like she owns it, and now the general is going to waste a whole range day proving what everybody already knows. She is going to get out there, she's going to miss by a country mile, and then maybe things will go back to normal around here. There was laughter around the table. There was head shaking. There was the particular cruelty of experienced men who had decided before seeing a single thing with their own eyes that a young woman could not possibly be what she claimed to be. Not everyone laughed. At the far end of the club, alone with a cup of coffee going cold in front of him, sat Captain Ethan Wallace. Wallace was the officer in charge of the long-range facility where the evaluation would take place. He was 38 years old, and he had spent 12 of those years around the finest marksmen the Army had to offer. He had seen the best. He had trained some of them, and he did not laugh, because Ethan Wallace had heard something the others had not. Earlier that day, when the paperwork for the evaluation crossed his desk, he had made a phone call. Just a routine call verifying the logistics, arranging the range time. And the officer on the other end of the line, an old friend from a different command, had gone very quiet when Wallace mentioned the name Bennett. "Say that name again," the voice on the phone had said. "Bennett, Claire Bennett, Staff Sergeant. We are running a long-range eval for her out here." There had been a long silence. "Ethan," the voice said finally, "do yourself a favor. Whatever you think you know about long-range shooting, whatever you have seen in 12 years, leave it at the door before you watch her shoot, and do not under any circumstances embarrass yourself by betting against her." "Who is she?" "I cannot tell you that. I am not cleared to tell you that, and neither are you, but I am telling you as a friend, that girl is not what she looks like. Nobody who ends up with that badge is what they look like." And then the line had gone dead. So Captain Ethan Wallace sat alone in the corner of the club, listening to men who had never met Claire Bennett explain with total confidence exactly how she was going to fail. And he said nothing. He simply drank his cold coffee and thought about that silence on the phone and about the way his old friend's voice had dropped when he heard her name. The evaluation was scheduled for 3 days later at a remote range complex tucked into the mountains of Colorado, chosen specifically because it was one of the only facilities in the region that could physically accommodate a shot of the distance in question. Getting there required a convoy, a mountain drive, and the involvement of far more people than a routine qualification would ever need. And every one of those people, it seemed, had an opinion. The night before the convoy departed, Claire Bennett sat alone in the transient barracks cleaning a rifle that was not even the one she would be shooting, simply because cleaning a rifle was what her hands did when the rest of her needed to be quiet. There was a knock at the open door. She looked up. Captain Ethan Wallace stood in the doorway out of uniform holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "Sergeant Bennett," he said, "mind if I sit down for a minute?" "It is the captain's base, sir. The captain can sit wherever he likes." That is a very polite way of not answering. He came in anyway, set one of the coffees down beside her, and lowered himself onto the empty bunk across from hers. "I am going to be running your evaluation the day after tomorrow. I thought we should talk before we are both standing on a range with the whole world watching." "Yes, sir." "You know what they are saying about you," Wallace said. It was not a question. "The whole base is talking. Half of them think you are a fraud. The other half think you cheated your way into that badge somehow. You know that, right?" "I am aware, sir." "And it does not bother you." Claire set the cleaning rod down. She looked at the captain with those steady eyes that seemed to belong to someone much older than 23. "Captain Wallace," she said, "may I be honest with you? I wish you would. What people say about me before they have seen me shoot is not information. It is noise. And I stopped listening to noise a long time ago in a place where listening to noise could get people killed. So no, sir, it does not bother me. I have been doubted by better men than the ones in that club, and I am still here, and they are not standing where I have stood." She paused. "That is not arrogance, Captain. I want the captain to understand that. It is just the truth, and I am tired enough of being doubted that I have stopped decorating the truth to make it easier to hear." Wallace studied her for a long time. "You know," he said slowly, "in 12 years around shooters, I have met a lot of talented people. And the talented ones, the ones who are really good, they always want you to know it. They cannot help it. They drop hints. They tell the stories. They make sure you understand how good they are, because being good is the most important thing in their whole world." He tilted his head. "You have not done any of that, not once. You keep telling me you are good, but only because I keep asking you directly, and every time you say it, you look like you would rather be talking about anything else. That is because I would, sir. Why? Claire was quiet for a moment, and when she answered, her voice was lower. Because the shots I am proud of are not the ones I am allowed to talk about, she said. And the number on this badge is not something I earned in a competition, Captain. I did not win a trophy for it. I want the captain to be very clear about that before he watches me shoot the day after tomorrow, because I think he is a good enough officer to deserve the truth. That number came from the worst day of my life, and every time I put my eye behind a scope, I have to walk back into that day to do it. So no, sir, I do not enjoy talking about how good I am. Being this good cost me something that I am still paying for. The captain did not say anything for a long moment. Who were you shooting for? He asked quietly. On that day, Claire picked the cleaning rod back up. Her hands were steady, but her voice when it came was not quite as steady as before. People who were counting on me to be perfect, she said. That is all I can say, sir. People who were counting on me and who did not have anyone else. Ethan Wallace stood up slowly. He looked down at the young sergeant cleaning a rifle she would not even use, and he understood suddenly and completely why his old friend on the phone had gone so quiet. I am going to tell you something, Sergeant Bennett, Wallace said, and I am going to say it once, and then I am going to leave you alone. The day after tomorrow, there are going to be a lot of men on that range hoping you fail. Some of them because they cannot stand the idea that you might be better than they are. Some of them is because you are new and you are young and you did not ask their permission to be extraordinary. He paused at the door. I am not one of them. Whatever happens out there, I want you to know that at least one person watching wants to see you hit that target. Not to prove anything to the general. Just because I think you have earned the right to be believed. Claire looked up at him, and for just a second the armor slipped, and he saw how tired she really was underneath it. Thank you, sir, she said quietly. The captain has no idea how rare it is for someone to say that to me. The morning of the evaluation arrived cold and hard and clear. The convoy wound up into the mountains before dawn, and by the time the sun had fully cleared the ridgeline, the range was crowded with more people than anyone had expected. Word had spread. Officers had invented reasons to be present. Senior non-commissioned officers had arranged their schedules to make sure they could watch. Everyone wanted to see it. Everyone wanted to be able to say afterward that they had been there. General Whitaker arrived last, stepping out of his vehicle with Captain Wallace at his side, and the entire crowd came to attention. Be at ease, the general said. Let us get one thing understood before we begin. This is not a show. This is an official evaluation conducted for a specific reason, and every one of you is going to conduct yourselves professionally regardless of what you personally believe about the outcome. Am I clear? Yes, sir, the crowd answered. But Whitaker could see it in their faces. The doubt, the barely hidden smiles. Master Sergeant Corrigan near the front, arms folded across his chest, wearing the expression of a man who had already decided how the day would end and was simply waiting to be proven right. And then Claire Bennett stepped out of the second vehicle and the crowd went quiet. She did not look like a legend. That was the first thing everyone noticed. She looked small and young and unremarkable. A slight young woman in ordinary gear carrying nothing but a case and a data book. She did not swagger. She did not scan the crowd looking for admirers. She simply walked to the firing position, set down her case, and knelt beside it and began to work. That is her, someone whispered. That is the 3,200-meter girl. That is her. She looks like somebody's daughter. She was somebody's daughter. That was the thing that none of them were thinking about, standing there in the cold with their arms folded and their easy contempt. She was somebody's daughter, and somewhere far away there was a mother who did not know where she was, who could only ever ask one question, and who received the same one-word answer every single time. Whitaker watched her open the case and begin assembling the Barrett, and even from a distance, even to a man who was not himself a sniper, something about the way she handled the weapon was different from everything he had seen before. He leaned toward Wallace. Captain, he said quietly, you have watched a lot of shooters. Tell me what you see. Wallace was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on Claire. Sir, he said finally, you see how she is not rushing. Every man out here is watching her, and she is moving like she is completely alone. That is the first thing. The really good ones, they perform for the crowd. They speed up, they show off, they let the pressure change them. She is not performing for anybody. He paused. And look at her hands, sir. Look how still they are. It is 40 degrees out here. She is under more scrutiny than any shooter I have ever seen, and her hands are not moving at all. That is not training, General. You cannot train that. That is something that gets built into a person after they have done this, when it actually mattered, when the target could shoot back. Whitaker said nothing, but he filed the words away. Down at the firing line, Claire finished assembling the rifle and settled into position behind it. She pulled out her data book. She checked the wind. She checked it again. She looked through her spotting scope at a target that was so far away it was invisible to the naked eye, a steel plate sitting 3,200 meters distant across a valley over uneven ground, exposed to crosswinds that shifted and swirled between the mountains. Captain Wallace moved down to the firing line to act as her official range observer, taking up a position behind his own spotting scope. He was the one man out there qualified to confirm the shot, and he intended to confirm it honestly, whatever the result. Sergeant Bennett, he said, in your own time, there is no rush. This is your range. Yes, sir. She did not answer anything else. She had gone somewhere else now, somewhere the crowd could not follow, somewhere behind her own eyes. Wallace had seen shooters go there before, but never this fast and never this completely. Behind them, the crowd waited, and the muttering started. She has been sitting there for 10 minutes, Corrigan said under his breath. She is stalling. She is trying to figure out how to explain the miss before she even takes it. Give her a minute, someone answered. A minute, at that range, she would need a miracle. Not a minute. Nobody hits steel at 3.2 clicks. Nobody. I do not care what her badge says. It is not physically possible for a human being to do that on demand on a cold morning with these winds on the first attempt. It cannot be done. And down on the line, Claire Bennett breathed. She was not thinking about Corrigan. She was not thinking about the general or the crowd or the badge or any of it. She had done what she always did, the thing she had learned to do a long time ago, in a place she was not allowed to name. She had emptied herself out completely until there was nothing left inside her but the wind and the distance and the target and the slow, patient math of getting a piece of metal to travel more than 2 miles and arrive exactly where she needed it to arrive. She thought about the people she had made shots for once in the worst hours of her life. She thought about a day she visited every single time she put her eye behind a scope, a day she could never leave behind because it had made her into what she was. And then she stopped thinking about anything at all. Her fingers settled on the trigger. Captain Wallace, watching through his spotting scope, saw her body go completely still. Not the stillness of a person holding tension, the stillness of a person from whom every ounce of tension had already drained away. Send it when you are ready, Sergeant, he said softly. She did not answer. She had already stopped hearing him. She waited. She watched a ripple of wind cross the valley, waited for it to pass, waited for the pocket of stillness she knew would come behind it. One breath in, one breath halfway out. The world narrowed down to a single point of steel 2 miles away, a point no human eye could see, a point that existed for her only as a number, a calculation, a certainty she carried in her hands. And behind her, 100 people held their breath at once, and every single one of them, the believers and the doubters, the ones who wanted her to win, and the ones who were praying she would fall, leaned forward in the exact same instant, because whatever they believed about Claire Bennett, not one of them could look away. She squeezed. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and the sound of the shot rolled out across the valley like thunder breaking loose from the mountains. And then there was nothing but the wind and the ringing in 100 pairs of ears and the impossible agonizing wait, while a piece of metal traveled more than 2 miles through the cold morning air toward a target no one standing on that line could even see. 1 second passed. Master Sergeant Corrigan smiled. 2 seconds. The smile widened. There it is, Corrigan muttered to the man beside him. There is your miracle girl. Nothing. Not a thing, I told you. I told all of you, nobody hits steel at 3.2 clicks, and now she is going to stand up and make some excuse about the wind, and we can all go home and forget about this circus. 3 seconds. Captain Ethan Wallace did not breathe. His eye was pressed against the spotting scope, his whole body rigid, and he did not so much as blink because he had learned a long time ago that the difference between confirming a shot and missing it could live in a single fraction of a second of inattention. 4 seconds. And then faint and far away, carried back across the entire length of that valley on the thin mountain air, came a single clean metallic sound. A ring. Steel. The unmistakable, unarguable, impossible sound of a 50 caliber round striking exactly where it had been sent. For one full heartbeat, nobody on that range moved. And then Captain Ethan Wallace slowly lifted his head from the spotting scope, and his face had gone completely white. And he said the only word he was capable of saying. Hit. Nobody responded. So he said it again, louder this time, loud enough for every single person on that firing line to hear it loud enough that it echoed off the rocks. Confirmed hit. Center mass. 3,200 meters. First round. Clean. The silence that followed was the loudest silence General Thomas Whitaker had ever heard in his life. Corrigan's smile was gone. It had simply fallen off his face, and what was left underneath it was something Whitaker had never seen on the old master sergeant before, something that looked almost like fear. His arms had come uncrossed. His mouth had opened slightly, and he was staring down at the small young woman on the firing line as though she had just performed a miracle in front of his eyes, which in a way she had. That is not possible, Corrigan said. But this time there was no laughter in it. This time it came out as a whisper, the voice of a man watching everything he had been so certain about collapse into rubble. That is not, she cannot have, that is not possible. You just watched it happen, Master Sergeant, Wallace said quietly without turning around. I am looking at the target right now through the scope. I am looking at a fresh strike dead center. So you are going to have to find a new word because impossible is not going to work anymore. And down on the line, Claire Bennett did the thing that broke everyone's heart a little without them even understanding why. She did not celebrate. She did not leap to her feet with her arms in the air. She did not turn around to find Corrigan's face and gloat. She did not look for the general to see if he was impressed. She simply pulled the bolt back, ejected the spent casing, caught it in her hand, and set it carefully to the side. Then she opened her data book, picked up her pen, and began calmly and methodically to write down the results of the shot. The wind, the temperature, the elevation, the hold. Every variable recorded in a neat, disciplined hand exactly the way she would have recorded a shot that nobody had been watching, exactly the way she had recorded 10,000 shots before this one, in places these men would never know the names of. She was doing paperwork. She had just accomplished something that maybe a dozen human beings on the entire planet could do, in front of a crowd that had come to watch her fail, and her response was to do her paperwork. General Whitaker felt something turn over in his chest. He had spent 34 years learning to read soldiers, and he was reading one now, and what he read in the quiet, unhurried way that young woman filled out her data book was not talent. Talent he had seen before. Talent showed off. Talent needed the crowd. This was something else entirely. This was a person for whom the extraordinary had become ordinary. A person who had been the best in the room so many times, in so many places, where being the best was the only thing that kept people alive, that she had simply stopped noticing it. She was not impressed with herself. That was the thing that hollowed him out. She had done the impossible, and she was not impressed with herself because for Claire Bennett, this had not been the impossible at all. This had been a Tuesday. Captain Wallace, Whitaker said. His voice did not sound entirely like his own. Come here. Wallace rose from behind the spotting scope and walked back up the slope to where the general stood, and the whole crowd watched him come because everyone understood that whatever the captain said next was official, was real, was the thing that would go in the report. Talk to me, Captain, Whitaker said. And I want it straight, no hedging. Was that shot what I think it was? Sir, Wallace said, and Whitaker could hear that the captain was still shaken. In 12 years around the best shooters this army has, I have never seen anything like what I just watched. I want to be very precise about this, General, because I know it is going to be in a report, and I know it is going to be questioned. That was not a lucky shot. A lucky shot at that distance, you might get 1 in 1,000 tries from a great shooter, and even then it would be dumb luck. What I just watched was not luck. She read the wind. She waited for a window. She sent 1 round on a cold barrel with no warm-up, no ranging shots, no adjustment, and she put it dead center at 3,200 meters on the first and only attempt. Wallace shook his head slowly. Sir, I do not have a category for that. I do not have a name for a shooter who can do that. Whatever she is, it is not something I have a word for. Whitaker was quiet for a moment, And the badge, he said, the number. The number is real, General. I would have bet my career an hour ago that it was inflated. I would have lost that bet. That number is real, and if anything, I would say it is conservative. Behind them, the crowd had begun to break into murmurs, low and disbelieving, the sound of 100 certainties dying all at once. Men who had spent the drive up the mountain explaining exactly how the girl would fail were now standing in awkward, chastened silence, unable to look at each other, unable to explain away what they had all just seen with their own eyes. And Master Sergeant Dale Corrigan, who had laughed loudest and longest, who had staked his 26 years of experience on the certainty that this was a fraud, pushed his way down toward the firing line. Whitaker saw him coming and almost stopped him. But something told him to wait. Something told him to let this happen. Corrigan reached the firing position where Claire was still kneeling over her data book, and he stopped a few feet away, and for a long moment he simply stared at her. This old, hard man who had seen everything staring at a young woman he had been so sure he had figured out. "Sergeant," he said finally. His voice was rough. "Sergeant Bennett." Claire looked up. "Master Sergeant, I owe you an apology." The words came out of him like they cost him something, and they did. "I said things back at the base, in the club. I said you were a fraud. I said somebody was carrying you, giving you special treatment, that you strolled in here like you owned the place. I said you were going to miss by a mile." He swallowed hard. "I have been doing this for 26 years, Sergeant, and I have never seen a shot like that. Not from anybody, not from the legends, and I judged you before I ever saw you put your eye behind a scope, and I was wrong, and I am man enough to stand here and say it. I am sorry." And here was the moment that changed something in every person close enough to hear it. Claire Bennett did not gloat. She did not say, "I told you so." She did not use the Master Sergeant's public apology as a chance to make him feel smaller, the way she would have had every right to do. Instead, she stood up and she looked at the old man with something that was almost gentle, and she said, "Master Sergeant, there is nothing to apologize for. You judged me by what you have seen in 26 years, and in 26 years, you have never had a reason to believe a shot like that was possible. You were not being cruel. You were being experienced. The only difference between us is that I have been somewhere that taught me the impossible is just the part of the map nobody has walked far enough to reach yet." She paused. "You are a good marksman, Master Sergeant. I can tell just by watching how you carry yourself. Do not ever apologize to me for being good at your job. Just be willing to see a little farther. That is all any of us can do." Corrigan stared at her, and then slowly he came to attention and he saluted her, a Master Sergeant with 26 years of service. Saluting a staff sergeant less than half his age, and every person on that range understood that they had just watched something they would remember for the rest of their lives. "Yes, ma'am," Corrigan said quietly. "I will do that." Claire returned the salute, and then because she was who she was, she went back to her data book. General Whitaker watched all of it, and by the time it was over, he had made a decision. He was going to find out who Claire Bennett was, no matter what it took, no matter how many doors were locked, no matter how many people told him he was not cleared to know. Because a person did not become what he had just watched by accident. A person did not develop that kind of skill and that kind of quiet and that kind of grace under a crowd that wanted them to fail without a story behind them. And Whitaker had spent his whole career believing that you could not truly lead a soldier you did not understand. He wanted to understand her. And more than that, if he was being honest with himself, he wanted to know what had happened to a 23-year-old girl to make her hands that still. He walked down to the firing line. "Sergeant Bennett," she stood, closed her data book, and came to attention. "Sir." "At ease." He looked at her for a long moment. "That was the finest shooting I have seen in 34 years of service, and I have seen a great deal. You understand that this changes things." "Sir, an hour ago I thought you were a fraud and I was going to have your stripes. I was wrong, and I am not too proud to say it, the same as the Master Sergeant was not too proud to say it. But now I have a different problem, Sergeant. Now I have watched you do something that almost no one alive can do, and I still cannot read a single line of your file. And I find that I can no longer accept that, not because I am angry, because I am responsible for you now. You are on my installation under my command, and I do not know where you have been or what has been asked of you or what it has cost you. And a commander who does not know those things about his soldiers is a commander who is failing them. Something shifted in Claire's face, just slightly, but Whitaker caught it. With respect, General, she said, the General already knows everything he needs to know to command me. I follow orders, I show up, I do the job, I do not cause problems. Where I have been is not something that will make me a better or worse soldier standing in front of the General today. I disagree, Sergeant, and I think you know I disagree, or you would not be working so hard to change the subject. She said nothing. Let me ask you a question, Whitaker said, and his voice was quieter now, the voice of a man setting down his rank and speaking as one person to another. That badge, the number. Captain Wallace tells me it did not come from a competition. He tells me nobody wears a badge like that for winning a trophy. So I am going to ask you plainly, and you can refuse to answer, and I will not hold it against you. Where did that number come from? For a long moment, Claire Bennett looked at the ground, and then she looked up, and her eyes had changed. The steadiness was still there, but underneath it now, there was something raw, something she had been holding down for a very long time, and Whitaker realized he was seeing a crack in a wall that this young woman had spent years building. It came from the worst day of my life, sir, she said quietly. That is where that number came from. I will tell the General that much because I think the General has earned it. But I will ask the General not to make me say more than that. Not here, not in front of everybody. And Whitaker, who had commanded soldiers for 3 decades, who had learned when to push and when to stop, heard something in her voice that made him stop. All right, Sergeant, he said gently. Not here, not in front of everybody. But when we get back to the base, I would like to talk to you. Not as your General, just to talk. Will you give me that? Claire looked at him for a long moment, this 3-star general who had thrown her against a rack that morning and was now asking her almost humbly for a conversation. Yes, sir, she said. I will give the General that. The drive back down the mountain was very different from the drive up. On the way up, the convoy had been full of confident laughter of men swapping predictions about how badly the girl was going to fail, of the easy cruelty of people who have already decided the outcome. On the way down, it was quiet. It was the quiet of men who had been humbled, who had watched their certainties break apart in a single ringing second of steel on steel, and who were still trying to fit the pieces of their worldview back together. Somewhere in the middle of that convoy, in a vehicle full of non-commissioned officers who had come to laugh, someone finally spoke the question that was on all of their minds. Where do you even learn to shoot like that? A young sergeant asked to no one in particular. That is not marksmanship school. That is not sniper school. I went to sniper school. They do not teach that. Nobody teaches that. So where does a 23-year-old learn to hit steel at 3.2 clicks on the first cold shot? And Master Sergeant Corrigan, staring out the window at the mountains sliding past, answered him in a low voice. You do not learn that in a school, Corrigan said. You learn that in a place where missing gets somebody killed. You learn that when the target is not a piece of steel, when the target is a threat to people you are responsible for, and you have one shot and there is no second chance, and if your hand shakes, someone dies. That is where you learn to shoot like that. That is the only place you learn to shoot like that. He shook his head slowly. That girl has been somewhere none of us have been. And she came back. And she has been carrying it around ever since. And none of us even bothered to ask. We just decided she was a fraud because it made us feel better about ourselves. The vehicle was silent after that. Back at Redstone Mountain, word of the shot arrived before the convoy did. By the time the vehicles rolled through the gate, the story had already spread across the entire installation. And it had grown in the telling the way all great stories do. Some said she had hit the target with her eyes closed. Some said she had made 3 shots and hit dead center every time. Some said the General had wept. None of it was true and none of it mattered because the core of the story was true and the core of the story was enough. A young sergeant that nobody knew had done the impossible and the whole base was talking about it. But there was one person who was not talking about it. One person who heard the story spreading through the base and went very still and then very quiet and then made a phone call to a number that most people at Redstone Mountain did not even know existed. Colonel Michael Reeves had not planned on ever seeing Claire Bennett again. That was not because he did not care about her. It was because caring about Claire Bennett came with a weight that Michael Reeves had spent years trying to set down. And every time he saw her or heard her name or thought about what had happened on the day that number was earned, The weight came back and settled on his chest and made it hard to breathe. He had been her supervisor once in a place and a time he was not permitted to discuss with anyone. He had been the one who put her in a position no 19-year-old should ever have been put in. He had been the one who watched her make a decision that no teenager should ever have to make. And he had been the one who signed the paperwork afterward, the paperwork that buried what she had done so deep that even a 3-star general could not dig it back up. And now Seti, sitting at his desk, hundreds of miles away, Colonel Reeves listened to a voice on the phone tell him that Claire Bennett had made a 3,200-meter shot in front of a crowd at Redstone Mountain, and that a General Thomas Whitaker was asking questions, and that maybe, just maybe, it was time for someone who actually knew the truth to come and tell it. Reeves closed his eyes. "I will come," he said. "Do not let anyone tell him anything before I get there. Whatever happened, whatever he thinks he knows, he does not know, the half of it, and I am not going to let that girl's story get told by people who were not there. I owe her that much." He paused. "I owe her a great deal more than that, but I will start with that." 2 days later, Colonel Michael Reeves arrived at Redstone Mountain. He did not announce himself. He did not go to the general's office first. He did the thing that told Whitaker, when he heard about it later, everything he needed to know about the kind of man Reeves was and the kind of bond he had with Claire Bennett. He went to the weapons bay, and he found her there exactly where the general had first found her, cleaning a rifle alone, doing her job. And when she looked up and saw him standing in the doorway, the data book fell out of her hands. "Colonel Reeves," she said, and her voice for the first time in the entire story cracked. "Hello, Claire," Reeves said quietly. He was not using her rank. He was using her name, and the way he said it carried years in it. "It has been a long time." For a moment, she just looked at him, and then something in the young woman who had not flinched when a general threw her against a rack, who had not celebrated the impossible shot, who had absorbed a crowd's contempt without letting it touch her. Something in that young woman came loose, and she crossed the weapons bay and stopped in front of the colonel, and she did not know what to do with her hands. "You came," she said. "I did not think, after everything, I did not think you would ever want to." "Claire," Reeves's voice was rough, "there has not been a single day since then that I have not thought about you. Not one. You think I do not want to see you, have been ashamed to see you. There is a difference. I put you in that position. I gave you that shot. You were 19 years old, and I asked you to do something that I had no right to ask anyone to do, let alone a girl who should have been worrying about ordinary things, and you did it, and it saved them, all of them. And then I signed the papers that made sure the whole world would never know. I did that, not you. So do not stand there and think I did not want to come. I did not come because I could not look at what I did to you." Claire's eyes were wet now, and she was not fighting it as hard as she usually did. "You did not do anything to me, Colonel," she said. "You gave me a choice, and I made it. And I would make it again. Every single time I would make it again, because they came home, and that is the only thing that has ever mattered to me about that day. You did not put a weight on me. You gave me the one thing I have that I am not ashamed of." Reeves closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they were wet too. "There is a general here," he said, "asking questions. Whitaker, do you know what he wants?" "He wants to understand me," Claire said. "He is not a bad man, Colonel. He threw me against a rack the first day, and then he watched me shoot, and something changed in him. He asked me where the number came from. I told him it came from the worst day of my life, and I asked him not to make me say more, and he stopped. He did not push. He said he wanted to talk to me. Just to talk." "And do you want to talk to him?" Claire was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know," she said honestly. "I have spent so long not talking about it that I do not know what happens if I start. But he is a good commander, Colonel. And I am tired. I am so tired of being the girl nobody knows, the file nobody can read, the number nobody understands. Sometimes I think it would be a relief if just one person in charge of me actually knew what it cost." Reeves put his hand on her shoulder. "Then let me tell him," he said, "not the classified parts. I cannot tell him those, and neither can you, and we both know it. But the truth of it, the shape of it, what it meant, what you did. Let me be the one to tell him, Claire, because I was there, and because for once in my life I would like to do something for you instead of to you. Will you let me do that?" And Claire Bennett, who had carried this alone for years, who had absorbed every doubt and every insult and every raised eyebrow without ever once being able to explain herself, looked at the man who had been there on the worst day of her life, and she nodded. "Yes," she said quietly, "I will let you do that." General Whitaker was in his office when Colonel Reeves knocked on the doorframe. "General Whitaker, Colonel Michael Reeves, I believe you have been asking about a soldier under my former command." Whitaker stood immediately. "Colonel, yes, please come in, sit down. I have been trying for 3 days to get a single answer about Sergeant Bennett, and every door I open is locked." "They are locked for a reason, General," Reeves said, taking a seat. "And most of them are going to stay locked because I am not cleared to open them, and neither are you. But I have talked to Claire, and she has given me permission to tell you what I can. Not the operational details, not the where or the when, but the truth of what that number on her chest means. Because I think you have earned it, and more than that, I think she needs one person in her chain of command to finally know." Whitaker sat down slowly. "I am listening, Colonel. And Colonel, whatever you tell me does not leave this room." Reeves was quiet for a moment, gathering himself. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady, the voice of a man who had rehearsed this in his head 1,000 times without ever expecting to say it out loud. "She was 19 years old," Reeves began. 19. She had already shown that she was something extraordinary behind a rifle, something that comes along once in a generation, maybe less. She had a gift that people spend their whole lives chasing and never touch. And because she had that gift, she ended up in a place where that gift was needed, and I was the officer responsible for her. He paused. "There was a day, General. I cannot tell you where. I cannot tell you when. But there was a day when several American service members were in a situation they were not going to survive. There was no rescue coming in time. There were no good options. There was one option, and the option was a shot, and it was a shot that no one believed could be made at a distance that no one believed was possible under conditions that were about as bad as conditions get. And the only person in position to take that shot was a 19-year-old girl." Whitaker did not move. "I gave her the shot, General," Reeves said, and his voice was thick now. "I want you to understand that I made that call. I looked at a teenager and I told her that the lives of those men were in her hands, that there was no one else, that if she missed, they died, and that she had one round to make it. And I have hated myself for it every day since, because no one should ever have to put that on a 19-year-old, no matter how good she is." "And she made it," Whitaker said quietly. "It was not a question. She made it." Reeves looked up, and there were tears standing in his eyes now, unashamed. 3,200 meters, one round. Cold barrel, worst conditions I have ever seen. And a 19-year-old girl put that round exactly where it needed to go, and every one of those men came home to their families. Every single one. There are children walking around today, General, kids who have their fathers, because a teenager did not let her hands shake on the worst day of her life. The office was silent. There was no ceremony, Reeves went on. There was no medal, not one that anyone will ever see. There was no story in the news. There was nothing but a badge that only a handful of people in the world would even recognize, and a number that means nothing to anyone who does not know what it cost. She saved their lives, and the reward for it was to disappear. To have her file sealed, to become the girl nobody knows, the soldier with the erased history, the one who gets thrown against a weapons rack by a general who has no idea who she is. Reeves's jaw tightened. That is what that number means, General. It means a 19-year-old carried the lives of grown men on the tip of a bullet, and then she carried the silence about it alone for years, without a single person around her knowing why she is the way she is. Whitaker sat back in his chair, and for a long moment the three-star general, who had seen everything, who had commanded soldiers for 34 years, who had thought there was nothing left in the military that could surprise him, could not find a single word to say. "My God," he said finally, "and I threw her against a rack. You did not know." "That is not an excuse, Colonel. That is exactly the problem. I did not know, and I did not bother to find out before I decided what she was. Just like the master sergeant on the range. Just like everyone. We all looked at a young woman we did not recognize, and we decided she was nobody, and the entire time she was carrying that." Whitaker rubbed a hand across his face. "How does she do it? How does she stand there day after day letting people think she is nothing when she could tell them when she has every right to make them all feel this small, and she does not? Reeves managed a small, sad smile. Because that is who she is, General. She never did any of it for the recognition. If she wanted recognition, there are ways she could have gotten it. She did it because those men needed to come home. That was the whole reason. That is still the whole reason with everything she does. She does not need you to know. She never needed anyone to know. He paused. But I will tell you something. It would mean more to her than she would ever admit if just once one person in charge of her looked at her and saw all of it, saw the whole weight of it, and did not need her to explain. Whitaker stood up. Where is she now, Colonel? Where she always is, General, in the weapons bay, doing her job, same as if none of this had ever happened. The general walked out of his office, and he did not stop, and he did not slow down, and every soldier he passed came to attention, and he waved them off without breaking stride, because he had somewhere he needed to be and something he needed to do, and for the first time in a long time, Thomas Whitaker was not walking as a general. He was walking as a man who had gotten something very wrong and who intended to make it right. He reached the weapons bay, and there she was exactly where Reeves had said she would be, exactly where he had first found her kneeling beside a rifle with her data book open, doing her job in the quiet, unremarkable way she did everything. And for a moment, Whitaker just stood in the doorway and looked at her, and he saw her differently now. Completely differently, the way you see a person once you finally understand what they have survived. Sergeant Bennett, he said. She looked up and started to rise. Sir. No, stay where you are, please. He came into the room and stopped a few feet from her, and then to the astonishment of the two other soldiers working nearby, a three-star general lowered himself down so that he was closer to her level, so that he was not looking down at her. I spoke with Colonel Reeves. He told me what he could. I know I am not cleared for the details, and I am not asking for them, but I know enough now, Sergeant. I know what that number means. I know what you did, and I know what it cost you. Claire went very still. He told the general, she said quietly. He told me you were 19 years old, Whitaker said. He told me you made a shot that saved American lives when there was no one else who could. He told me there was no ceremony, no medal, no recognition, nothing but silence and a badge that almost no one in the world can read. And he told me that you have carried that silence alone all this time and never once used it to make anyone feel the way I made you feel on your first day here. He paused and his voice grew rougher. I threw you against Iraq, Sergeant. I called you a fraud. I called you a disgrace. And you stood there and took it because you have taken so much worse, and because you are not the kind of person who defends herself by throwing the truth in someone's face, even when you would have every right to. Sir, Claire started, the general could not have known. Stop, Whitaker said gently. Stop protecting me from it, Sergeant. That is exactly what I am talking about. You have spent your whole career protecting everyone else, the men you saved, the master sergeant who insulted you, and now me, the general who manhandled you on your first day. You keep telling everyone it is fine. They could not have known there is nothing to apologize for. Well, I am telling you there is something to apologize for, and I am not going to let you talk me out of it. I was wrong. I judged you before I knew you, and I was wrong in the worst way a commander can be wrong, and I am sorry. For a long moment, Claire Bennett did not say anything. And then slowly something happened that had not happened in front of anyone in a very long time. Her composure, that flawless iron composure that had held through the rack, in the crowd, in the impossible shot, wavered. Her eyes filled, and a single tear ran down her face, and she did not wipe it away because she was too tired to keep holding it back, and because for the first time in years, someone in charge of her had looked at the whole weight she carried and had not needed her to explain a single thing. Do you know, she said, and her voice was unsteady now, how long it has been since someone said that to me? Not thank you, not good shot, just I see you, I see what it cost, I am sorry. She wiped her face now, quickly, almost angrily embarrassed at herself. I have been the girl nobody knows for so long that I forgot what it felt like to be seen. I forgot it was even possible. Whitaker reached out and very gently put his hand on her shoulder, the same shoulder he had grabbed in anger on her first day. Well, he said quietly, you are not the girl nobody knows anymore, not to me. Whatever else happens, Sergeant Bennett, you have one person in your chain of command who knows exactly who you are and who is going to make very sure that you are never again treated like nobody on my installation. That is a promise. and I do not make promises I do not intend to keep." And Claire Bennett, 23 years old, who had made the impossible shot at 19 and carried the silence ever since, looked up at the general with tears on her face and something in her eyes that had not been there in a very long time. Not pride, not relief, something more like being home. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. And in the doorway of the weapons bay, unnoticed by either of them, Colonel Michael Reeves stood watching, and for the first time in years, the weight on his chest felt just a little bit lighter, because the girl he had asked to do the impossible, the girl he had buried in silence, was finally being seen. The lightness in Colonel Reeves' chest did not last the week, because 3 days after the general made his promise in the weapons bay, a black vehicle rolled through the gate at Redstone Mountain that no one had cleared, no one had announced, and no one had the authority to turn away. And the man who stepped out of it was carrying a briefcase, a set of orders, and a smile that did not reach anywhere near his eyes. His name was Gerald Vance, and he was not military. That was the first thing everyone noticed. He wore a civilian suit, expensive and gray, and he moved through the installation like a man who had been on 100 military bases and had never once felt small on any of them. He did not salute anyone. He did not need to. He handed a single sheet of paper to the gate guard, and the gate guard read it and went pale and picked up a phone, and within 10 minutes the word had reached General Whitaker's office that a man from an agency no one wanted to name had arrived, and that he was asking for Staff Sergeant Claire Bennett by name. Whitaker was on his feet before the sentence was finished. "Say that again," he said. "Sir, there is a civilian at the front of Barrett. He has federal credentials, the kind that override base command. He is asking for Sergeant Bennett. He says he is here to conduct a review, and he says, sir, he says he does not require your permission to do it." Whitaker's jaw tightened. "Get Colonel Reeves now, and do not let that man within 100 feet of Sergeant Bennett until I have looked him in the eye myself." But it was already too late for that. Because Gerald Vance was not a man who waited to be escorted. By the time Whitaker made it down to the front of the administrative building, Vance was already standing there, briefcase in hand, and he had already found Claire Bennett, and the two of them were standing several feet apart in a silence so tense that the soldiers around them had unconsciously backed away. Claire's face had changed. Whitaker saw it the moment he came around the corner, and it stopped him cold. All the quiet steadiness, all the calm that had held through the rack and the crowd and the impossible shot, all of it was gone. In its place was something he had not seen on her before. Not fear exactly. Something colder than fear. The look of a person seeing a ghost they had spent years praying they would never see again. "Hello, Claire," Vance said. "You are not supposed to be here," Claire said. Her voice was low and flat. "You are not supposed to be anywhere near me. That was the agreement." Agreements change. Vance smiled that smile that touched nothing. "You made a shot in front of 100 people, Claire. You put a number on your chest and let a crowd watch you prove it. Do you have any idea what that does? Do you have any idea how many quiet arrangements come undone the moment someone extraordinary decides to stop being invisible?" "I did not decide anything," Claire said. "I was ordered to demonstrate by a general who had every right to order it. I did not ask for a crowd. I did not ask for any of this. And yet here we are." "Here we are," Whitaker said, stepping into the space between them, and his voice was the voice he used when he wanted a room to understand exactly who was in command of it. "I am General Thomas Whitaker. This is my installation, and you are going to tell me right now who you are, what agency you represent, and what business you think you have with a soldier under my command." Vance turned to look at him, and he took his time about it, and when he finally spoke, his tone carried the particular arrogance of a man who had made generals nervous before and had enjoyed every second of it. "General Whitaker, your reputation precedes you. 34 years, 3 stars, a spotless record." He tilted his head. "I represent an interest that operates several levels above the concerns of any installation commander. I am here to review an asset. That asset is standing right there. And with respect, General, your rank, impressive as it is, does not reach the shelf that my authority sits on. So I would ask you to step aside and let me do my job." "An asset," Whitaker repeated slowly, and something dangerous came into his voice. "You just called a soldier standing on my base an asset. You are going to want to choose your next words very carefully, because the last man who treated Sergeant Bennett like she was less than a human being was me on her first day here, and I have spent every day since regretting it. So I am not inclined to stand here and let you do the same thing in front of me twice. Vance's smile flickered just slightly. And it was in that moment that Colonel Reeves came around the corner at something close to a run, and when he saw who was standing there, he stopped so suddenly that he nearly lost his footing. Vance, Reeves breathed. No, no, you do not get to come here. Not after everything. You do not get to walk back into her life like you have any right to it. Colonel Reeves, Vance's smile returned in full. I wondered if you would be here. It seems everyone who buried this girl has come to check on their handiwork. How touching. The team is back together. What do you want, Vance? Reeves' voice was shaking now, but not with fear. With fury. She did everything you people ever asked of her. She did the impossible when she was 19 years old, and then she vanished exactly the way you told her to. She has caused you no problems. She has spoken to no one. So what could you possibly want from her now? Vance set his briefcase down on a nearby bench, opened it, and withdrew a single folder. There is a situation, he said. The details do not concern the general or the colonel, and frankly, they no longer concern the two of you at all. But there is a situation, and it requires a particular capability, and there are very few people in the world who possess that capability, and one of them has just spent the last week reminding an entire installation of exactly how rare she is. He looked at Claire. You put yourself back on the board, Claire. You made yourself visible. And now that you are visible, you are useful again. So I am here to activate you. The word hit the small crowd like a physical thing. Activate, Whitaker said. She is not out of anything, General, Earl, Vance said, still watching Claire. You thought she was retired, reassigned. Just a staff sergeant doing weapons maintenance on a mountain in Montana Numb. She was set aside. There is a difference. A capability like hers is never retired. It is stored. It is kept somewhere quiet until it is needed again. And I have just determined that it is needed again. And here Claire Bennett spoke, and her voice was different now, and everyone heard the change. No, she said. Vance turned to her slowly. I am sorry. I said no. Claire's hands were at her sides, and they were not shaking, and that stillness that Captain Wallace had noticed on the range, that impossible stillness was there again, but it was a different kind now. It was the stillness of someone who had made a decision she was not going to unmake. I did what you asked me to do once, Mr. Vance. I made the shot. I saved those men. And then I did the second thing you asked, the harder thing. I disappeared. I gave up everything a normal person gets to have. I gave up ever being able to tell my own mother what I did. I gave up being known. I have carried that in silence for years, and I did it without complaint, because you told me it was the price of those men living, and I decided those men living was worth any price at all. She took a breath. But you never told me the price would be forever. You never told me that one demonstration ordered by my own commander would put me right back on your shelf. And I am telling you, right here in front of these witnesses, that I am done. I am not an asset. I am not a capability in storage. I am a soldier and a person and a daughter, and I am done being something you take off a shelf whenever it suits you. For a moment, no one breathed. And then Vance laughed. It was soft and it was cold, and it was the most chilling sound anyone in that small crowd had heard in a long time. That is a beautiful speech, Claire, he said. It really is. And in a different world, it would even matter. But let me explain something to you and to the general and to the colonel, since you all seem to be under the impression that this is a negotiation. He closed the folder. You do not get to say no. That is not a capability you possess. When you took that shot at 19, you did not just make a bullet travel 2 miles. You made an agreement, and that agreement did not have an expiration date, and it did not have a clause where you get to decide years later that you would prefer to be an ordinary person now. You are what you are. You cannot unring that bell, and the moment you decided to prove to a crowd exactly what you are, you gave up any pretense that you could hide from it. That is enough. The voice was Whitaker's, and it cut through the air like a blade. That is enough, Mr. Vance, the general said, and he stepped fully in front of Claire now, so that Vance would have to go through him to reach her. I have listened to you insult a soldier under my command. I have listened to you talk about a human being like she is a tool you left in a drawer. And I have listened to you tell a 3-star general that his authority does not reach you. Now you are going to listen to me. He took a step closer. I do not know what shelf you sit on. I do not know what agency signs your checks, but I know the law. And I know that a soldier of the United States Army has rights. And one of those rights is that she cannot be dragged off my installation by a man in a gray suit who will not even tell me the name of the organization he represents. So you have two choices. You can produce documentation that would satisfy the Judge Advocate General that you have the lawful authority to remove this soldier, real documentation with real names on it, that I can verify through my own chain. Or you can get back in your vehicle and drive off my mountain. Vance studied him for a long moment. You are making a mistake, General. I have made a lot of mistakes, Whitaker said. Grabbing that young woman by the shoulder on her first day was one of them. Protecting her from you is not going to be another. Now, which is it going to be? The paperwork or the gate? And Gerald Vance did something then that made the situation worse instead of better. He smiled and he picked up his briefcase and he said, I will be back within 72 hours with paperwork that will make your Judge Advocate General weep. And when I come back, General, I will not be alone and I will not be asking. Enjoy your 72 hours. And he turned and he walked back to his vehicle and he drove off the mountain, and the silence he left behind was worse than anything he had said. Whitaker turned to Claire. She was still standing exactly where she had been, and now that Vance was gone, Whitaker could see how much that stillness had cost her. Her jaw was tight, her breathing was careful and controlled in the way of a person keeping herself together by force. Sergeant, he said gently, who was that man? He is the reason there is no ceremony, Claire said quietly. He is the reason there is no medal. He is the reason my file is black. He is the man who came to me after the shot when I was 19 and shaking and had just watched what a .50 caliber round does to a human being for the first time and told me that the price of those men going home was that I would cease to exist. That I would be moved and sealed and hidden, and that I would never tell anyone, not my mother, not my friends, not anyone, what I had done. And I agreed, sir. God help me, I was 19 and I agreed because he told me it was the only way, and I believed him. Whitaker felt something cold and hard settle in his stomach. And now he wants to use you again. Now he wants to use me again, Claire said. And he is right about one thing, General. I did put myself back on the board. I did make myself visible. I have spent this whole week thinking about that shot as the moment someone finally saw me, and it was, and I do not regret it. But it was also the moment I stopped being invisible to him. And I cannot regret the first thing without regretting the second, and I do not know how to feel about that. Colonel Reeves came forward now, and his face was gray. Claire, he said, I need to tell you something. And I should have told you years ago, and I did not because I was a coward and because I told myself it did not matter anymore. He swallowed. The agreement you made, the one where you disappeared, that was not standard. That was not how it is supposed to work. I have been in this a long time, and what they did to you, sealing you away like that, keeping you in reserve, it is not the way it is done. Vance did that. Vance specifically. He saw what you were at 19, and he did not want to lose access to it. So he built an arrangement where you would always belong to him. And I signed it because I was told to, and because I did not have the courage to ask why a teenager needed to be owned instead of honored. He looked at her, and his eyes were wet again. You were never supposed to be his Claire. You were supposed to be recognized and then let go. He stole your future, and I let him, and I have to live with that. Claire stared at him. You knew, she said quietly. All this time, you knew the arrangement was wrong. I suspected. I did not let myself know which is worse. Reeves' voice broke. I am sorry, Claire. I am so sorry. I have spent years telling myself that at least those men came home, and that made it all worth it, and it did make it worth it, but that does not mean what he did to you was right. Two things can be true. Those men living was worth it, and you being owned by that man was a crime. Both of those are true, and I have been hiding from the second one for years. For a long moment, Claire Bennett did not say anything. And then she did something that Whitaker would remember for the rest of his life. She crossed the distance between herself and Reeves, and she put her hand on the old colonel's arm, and she said, Colonel, look at me. You did not do this to me. Vance did this to me. You signed a paper you were ordered to sign, and you have carried the guilt of it for years. And the fact that you are standing here right now telling me the truth, when it would be so much easier to stay silent, tells me everything about what kind of man you are. Do not take on his crime. His crime is his. Yours is only that you love me enough to feel guilty about it, and that is not a crime at all." Reeves closed his eyes and a tear slid down his weathered face. "How are you like this?" he whispered. "After everything, how are you still like this?" "Because someone has to be," Claire said simply. "Because if I let what he did to me turn me into something bitter, then he wins twice. He took my future, and he took who I am. And I will let him have a lot of things, Colonel, but he does not get to have who I am. That is the one thing I have kept all this time. That is the one thing that is still mine." Whitaker had heard enough. "Colonel Reeves," he said, "in your professional judgment, is the arrangement that binds Sergeant Bennett to that man lawful?" Reeves wiped his face and straightened, and when he answered, it was in the voice of an officer. "No, sir, I do not believe it is. I believe it was constructed by exploiting a 19-year-old under duress in the immediate aftermath of a traumatic operational event. I believe it would not survive genuine legal scrutiny. And I believe the only reason it has never been challenged is that no one who knew about it has ever had both the knowledge and the courage to challenge it at the same time." He looked at Claire. "Until now." "Then here is what is going to happen," Whitaker said, and there was iron in every word. "That man gave us 72 hours. We are going to use them. Colonel Reeves, you know the details of this arrangement that I am not cleared to see. I cannot make you disclose classified information, and I would never ask you to. But I can tell you that I am going to place a call to the Judge Advocate General's office and to a friend of mine who sits in a position high enough to actually look at the shelf that Mr. Vance thinks he sits on. And I am going to find out with real names and real authority whether that man has any lawful claim to this soldier at all. And if he does not, then when he comes back through that gate in 72 hours, he is going to find that a 3-star general has been making phone calls, and he is going to find out that his shelf is not as high as he thinks it is." Claire looked at him. "General," she said quietly, "you do not have to do this. You do not know what you are stepping into. Vance is not a man who loses gracefully. If you make this your fight, it could cost you your career, your reputation, everything you have built in 34 years. And I am not worth that. I am one soldier. You have thousands. Do not burn down your life for me." And General Thomas Whitaker looked at the young woman who had made the impossible shot at 19, who had carried the silence alone for years, who had just faced down the man who owned her and told him no, who was now even in her own moment of crisis trying to protect him. And he understood something about her finally and completely. "Sergeant Bennett," he said, "do you know why you keep trying to protect everyone that met on that day? The master sergeant who insulted you, the colonel who signed the paper, me, and now me again trying to talk me out of helping you. Do you know why you do that? Sir, because somewhere along the way, someone taught you that you did not matter as much as everyone else, that your job was to carry the weight so that other people would not have to, that you were an asset, a capability, a thing that gets used and then stored, and not a person whose life is worth someone else's sacrifice." Whitaker's voice grew rough. "Vance taught you that. He taught it to you when you were 19 and shaking and vulnerable, and you have believed it ever since. And I am telling you right now that it is a lie. You matter exactly as much as any of those men you saved, exactly as much as me. And the fact that you cannot see that the fact that you are standing here telling a general you are not worth his career is the single clearest proof I have that what that man did to you was a crime." Claire's eyes filled. "I'm going to burn down whatever needs to be burned down," Whitaker said. "Not because you are one soldier out of thousands. Because you are a soldier and I am your commander, and a commander who would let a man in a gray suit drag one of his people off his mountain to protect his own career is not a commander at all. He is a coward with stars on his shoulders, and I did not serve 34 years to end up a coward at the finish line." He put his hand on her shoulder. "You are not going to talk me out of this, Sergeant, so you might as well save your breath and let me help you." And for the second time in a week, Claire Bennett, who never cried in front of anyone, who had built her whole life around not needing anything from anyone, felt the tears come, and this time she did not fight them at all. Why, she whispered. Why are you doing this? You have known me for a week. You threw me against a rack the first day. Why would you risk everything for me? Because a week ago I got something very wrong, Whitaker said quietly. And I have spent 34 years believing that the measure of a man is not whether he gets things wrong. Everyone gets things wrong. The measure of a man is what he does the moment he realizes it. I realized it, and this is what I am doing about it. That is all. That is the whole reason. Claire wiped her face and she looked at the general and at the colonel. These two men who had every reason to protect themselves and were instead choosing to protect her, and something in her that had been locked shut for years. Some door that Gerald Vance had slammed closed when she was 19 opened just slightly. All right, she said. Her voice was still unsteady, but underneath it there was something new now, something that had not been there before. Hope. All right, I will let you help me. But General, if we are going to do this, if we are really going to do this, then there is something you need to know first. Something I have never told anyone. Not the colonel, not anyone. She took a breath. Because if Vance comes back in 72 hours with his paperwork, he is going to use it against me, and it is better that you hear it from me now than from him then. Whitaker went still. What is it, Sergeant? Claire looked at the ground for a long moment, and when she looked back up, her face had gone pale. The shot, she said quietly, the one that saved those men, the one that put this number on my chest. She swallowed hard. There is a part of the story that even Colonel Reeves does not know, a part that Vance has held over my head this entire time. The real reason I could never tell any what happened that day, the real reason I disappeared. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. Those men that I saved, General, the reason it had to be silent, the reason there could never be a medal. She stopped and her hands for the first time since the very beginning began very slightly to shake. It was because of who they were and what they were doing there and what would happen to all of them and to me if the world ever found out the truth about that day. And Colonel Reeves, standing beside her, went absolutely white because in all these years, through all his guilt, he had believed he knew the whole story. And he was realizing in that moment that he did not. Say that again, Claire. Colonel Reeves' voice was barely above a whisper. You said there is a part of that day I do not know. That is not possible. I was there. I ran that operation. I saw the whole thing. You saw what you were allowed to see, Colonel, Claire said quietly. You saw the part they let you see. You ran the operation, yes, but you were not in the room when Vance came to me afterward. You were not there for the conversation that came after the shot. And that conversation is the reason everything is the way it is. Whitaker held up his hands. Sergeant, before you say another word, are you about to tell me something classified? Because if you are, I need you to stop, and we need to do this the right way with the right people in the room so that nothing you say here can be used against you later. And here Claire did something that surprised both men. She almost smiled. That is exactly the instinct that tells me, I can trust you, General, she said. You are worried about protecting me even now, even standing here not knowing what I am about to say. No, what I am about to tell you is not classified. That is the terrible part. It was never classified. Vance made me believe it was. He made me believe that the truth of that day was a secret so dangerous that speaking it would destroy me and everyone I saved. And I believed him because I was 19 and I did not know any better and there was no one to tell me otherwise. She took a breath. But it was never a secret to protect the country. It was a secret to protect him. The words landed and Reeves's face went from white to something worse. Explain that, he said. Right now, Claire. Explain that. The men I saved, Claire said. The ones I made the shot for. Do you remember them, Colonel? Of course I remember them. 4 men, pinned down, no extraction possible. You made the shot that broke the situation open, and they walked out alive. Reeves shook his head. I remember every second of it. 4 men walked out alive, Claire agreed. But there were 5 men, Colonel. Reeves froze. There were 5 men in that situation, Claire said, and her voice was steady, but her hands were still trembling. Not 4, and the 5th man was not one of ours. The 5th man was the reason the whole thing happened. And after the shot, after those 4 walked out, Vance came to me, and he told me that if I ever spoke about what happened that day, if I ever let a single detail slip, then the truth about the 5th man would come out. And the truth about the 5th man would end careers. important careers, careers belonging to people far above a 19-year-old staff sergeant. And so he told me for the good of everyone, I would need to disappear. I would need to be silent. I would need to become nobody. Because if I stayed visible, sooner or later, someone would ask the right question, and the answer to that question would burn a lot of powerful people to the ground. And I believed him. Who was the fifth man? Whitaker said quietly. Claire looked at him. I do not know his name, she said. I never knew his name, but I know that he was not supposed to be there. And I know that the operation that put those four men in that impossible situation was an operation that never should have happened, and I know that someone very high up made a decision that got four good men nearly killed, and I know that my shot did not just save those men. My shot erased the evidence of a mistake that powerful people did not want anyone to see. And Vance has spent all these years making sure that the one witness who could connect the shot to the mistake, the one person who was there and understood what she was really being asked to do, stayed buried where no one could ever find her. Reeves sat down heavily on the bench. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years and 10 seconds. All this time, he said, all this time I thought the silence was to protect an operation. I thought it was national security. I signed that paper because I believed there were lives at stake, that the secrecy mattered. His hands were shaking now too. And it was never that at all. It was a cover-up. I helped bury a 19-year-old girl to cover up someone's mistake, and I never even knew that was what I was doing. You did not know, Colonel, Claire said gently. That is the whole point. Nobody knew. Vance made sure nobody knew. He kept each of us holding one piece, and he made sure no one ever held two pieces at the same time. You held the operation. I held the fifth man. Someone else held the paperwork. And as long as none of us ever compared notes, the truth stayed buried, and Vance stayed safe. Whitaker had gone very quiet, and it was the quiet of a general doing math. Sergeant, he said slowly, do you understand what you just told me? I think so, sir. You just told me that the arrangement binding you to that man is not built on lawful authority at all. It is built on a threat. It is built on you believing that speaking the truth would destroy you and the men you saved. That is not an order. That is not a classification. That is blackmail. His jaw tightened. That man has been blackmailing a soldier of the United States Army for years using a lie he told her when she was 19 years old to keep her available to him like a weapon in a locker. That is not just wrong, Sergeant. That is criminal. And it changes everything about what happens when he comes back through that gate. General, Claire said carefully, there is a reason I never told anyone. Even now, saying it out loud to the two of you, I can feel my whole body telling me to stop. Because for years I believed that the moment I said it, everything would come apart. The four men would be exposed. Their careers, their families, everything they built after they came home, all of it would be dragged into the light and destroyed, and it would be my fault because I could not keep the secret. She swallowed. That is the leash he put on me. He did not chain me with fear for myself. He chained me with fear for them. He knew I would carry any weight to protect the men I saved. So he made protecting them the same thing as protecting him. And it worked. For years it worked. And now Reeves looked up, and there was something new in his face. Not guilt this time. Something harder. Claire, he said, those four men, do you know where they are now? No, Colonel, I was never allowed to know. That was part of it. I saved their lives, and then I was forbidden from ever knowing their names or where they went. I have wondered all these years. I have wondered whether they got to have the lives I gave up mine to protect. But I never knew. I know where one of them is, Reeves said quietly. The weapons bay went absolutely silent. I did not know it was connected to you until this exact moment, Reeves went on. But there is a man I have crossed paths with several times over the years, a retired senior officer. A good man by every account, and every single time I have seen him at ceremonies, at funerals, at the kind of gatherings that old soldiers go to, he has said the same thing to me. He has said, Colonel, someday I am going to find out who took that shot, because I owe that person my life, and my three friends owe that person their lives. And I have spent years trying to find out who it was so that I could look them in the eye and thank them, and every door I open is locked. Reeves' voice cracked. It was you, Claire. He has been looking for you for years. He does not want you buried. He wants to thank you. He has spent a decade trying to find the person who saved him, and Vance has kept him from it the same way Vance kept you from everything. Claire's breath caught. "He is looking for me," she said. "Someone has been looking for me to thank me." "For years, Claire. For years." Reeves stood up. "And here is the thing Vance never wanted either of you to understand. You have both been believing his lie. He told you that speaking the truth would destroy those men. But that man does not want to be protected. That man wants the truth. He wants to know who saved him. He wants to stand up and say it out loud. Vance told you that your silence protected them, but it never did. Your silence only ever protected Vance. The men you saved would tear down heaven and earth to give you the recognition you deserve if they only knew it was you. They are not your risk, Claire. They are your allies. They have been your allies this whole time, and you never knew it because Vance made sure you would spend your whole life afraid of the very people who love you most." And something broke open in Claire Bennett, then something that had been sealed shut for years, and she put her hand over her mouth, and for a long moment she could not speak at all. "All this time," she finally whispered, "all this time I have been afraid of hurting them, and they have been out there wanting to thank me, and I let him keep us apart. I let him convince me that the kindest thing I could do was stay buried when the truth is they would have given anything to find me." "You did not let him do anything," Whitaker said firmly. "You were 19 and he was a professional manipulator, and he built a cage so clever that you thought the bars were made out of love for the men you saved. That is not weakness, Sergeant. That is the opposite. He weaponized the best thing about you. He took your loyalty, the finest quality you have, and he turned it into a chain. That is not your shame. That is his crime." Reeves was already moving, pulling out his phone. "Colonel," Whitaker said, "what are you doing?" "I am doing the thing I should have done years ago," Reeves said. "I am making a phone call. Because in about 70 hours, Gerald Vance is going to come back through that gate with a briefcase full of paperwork and a smile on his face, expecting to find a frightened girl and a general who does not understand what he is up against. And I would very much like him to find something else instead." "What are you going to find?" Claire asked. Reeves paused his thumb over the screen. "I am going to find out," he said, "whether a retired senior officer who has spent 10 years trying to thank the person who saved his life would be willing to get on a plane and come to a mountain in Montana on very short notice. And I am going to find out whether he might be willing to bring his 3 friends. Because I have a feeling, Claire, that when Vance comes back and finds 4 decorated men standing next to you, 4 men who owe you their lives and who have wanted nothing for a decade, except to say so out loud, his paperwork is going to matter a great deal less than he thinks it does." Claire stared at him. "You would do that," she said. "You would bring them here." "I would do anything to fix what I helped break," Reeves said simply. "I signed the paper, Claire. I carry that. Let me carry this too. Let me be the one who makes the phone call that starts to make it right." And he stepped away, and he made the call, and the 2 people left, standing in the weapons bay. The general and the sergeant waited in a silence that was thick with something none of them had felt in a long time. Hope mixed with terror. The specific, unbearable feeling of daring to believe that something buried might finally come into the light. "General," Claire said quietly while they waited, "can I ask you something?" "Anything, Sergeant. When this is over, however it ends, whether Vance wins or loses, whether I stay a soldier or lose everything." She looked at him. "Will you tell me the truth about something? Because I have spent so long being lied to that I do not always know anymore what is real." "I will always tell you the truth, Sergeant. That is a promise." Claire was quiet for a moment. "Am I a good person?" she asked. And her voice was very small, smaller than Whitaker had ever heard it, the voice of the 19-year-old who was still somewhere inside the woman standing in front of him. "Because I have killed people, General. I have made a shot that ended a human life, and I have made others in places I cannot name, and I have carried it, and I have told myself it was to save people, and it was to save people. But Vance made me feel for years like I was a thing, a weapon, a capability. And when you are told you are a weapon for long enough, you start to wonder if there is a person underneath it all. So I am asking you because you have no reason to lie to me. Am I a good person, or am I just a very good weapon that convinced itself it was a person?" And General Thomas Whitaker, 3 stars, 34 years more decorations than he could wear on one uniform, looked at this young woman who had made the impossible shot, and he felt his throat tighten. "Sergeant Bennett," he said, A weapon does not ask that question. A weapon has never once wondered whether it is a good person, because a weapon does not have the thing inside it that would make it wonder. The fact that you are asking me the fact that it keeps you up at night, the fact that after everything you have done and everything that has been done to you, you still care whether your soul is intact, that is the proof. That is the whole proof. You are not a weapon that thinks it is a person. You are a person that a very bad man tried to convince was a weapon, and he failed. He had years and every advantage, and he failed. Because you are still standing here asking the question that no weapon has ever asked. His voice roughened. You are a good person, Claire. You are one of the best people I have ever had the honor to command, and I have commanded a great many people. Claire's eyes filled, and this time she let the tears come without any shame at all. Thank you, she whispered. I needed to hear that from someone who would not lie. And across the room, Reeves lowered his phone and turned around, and his face had changed. There was something in it now that had not been there in years. Something that looked almost like a man who had been given a chance to set down a weight he had carried for a very long time. Claire, he said. Yes, Colonel. He is coming. Reeves' voice was thick. The man I told you about. He did not even let me finish explaining. The moment I said I might know who took the shot, he stopped me. He said, whatever it takes, whatever it can, tell me where and tell me when. He is getting on a plane tonight. And Claire. Reeves's voice broke completely now. He is bringing the other 3. All 4 of them are coming. And 4 of the men you saved, they are coming here to this mountain to stand next to you when that man comes back through the gate. They have wanted to find you for 10 years. And now they know. Now they finally know it was you. Claire Bennett put both hands over her face and her shoulders shook. And for the first time in the entire story, she wept openly, the way a person weeps when a thing they never let themselves hope for turns out to be real after all. And General Heidecker put his hand on her shoulder, and Colonel Reeves crossed the room and stood on her other side, and the 3 of them stood there together in the weapons bay, where all of this had started, where a general had once thrown a young sergeant against a rack because he did not know who she was. He knew now. They all knew now. And in 70 hours, Gerald Vance was going to walk back through that gate, expecting to find a frightened girl he could put back on his shelf. Instead, he was going to find her surrounded. The 70 hours between Vance's threat and his return were the longest hours of Claire Bennett's life, and she spent almost none of them sleeping. It was not fear that kept her awake. She had made peace with fear a long time ago, in places where fear was a luxury she could not afford. What kept her awake was something stranger, something she did not have a name for because she had never felt it before. It was the terrible, fragile thing that happens inside a person who has spent years believing they are alone and then suddenly is told they might not be. Hope. Hope was heavier than fear. Fear she knew how to carry. Hope was new, and it sat on her chest all night, and every time she started to let herself believe it, some old voice inside her, a voice that sounded a great deal like Gerald Vance, whispered that it would not last, that it would be taken away, that people like her did not get to have things like this. At 3 a.m, she gave up on sleep entirely and walked to the weapons bay because cleaning a rifle was still what her hands did when the rest of her could not be still. She was not surprised to find that she was not alone. General Whitaker was already there sitting on the workbench, a cup of coffee, cooling beside him, staring at nothing. You could not sleep either, sir, Claire said. I have not slept the night before a fight in 34 years, Sergeant Whitaker said. I do not intend to start now. He gestured to the bench beside him. Sit down, you are making me tired just watching you stand there like you are waiting for orders. She sat. For a while, neither of them said anything. And then Whitaker spoke quietly in the way people speak in the dark before something difficult. I want to tell you what is going to happen tomorrow, he said. Not the plan, you know the plan. The 4 men arrive in the morning. Reeves has the documentation ready. My contacts are standing by. Vance comes through the gate at 0900 and finds a room he was not expecting. He paused. I do not mean that. I mean, I want to tell you what is going to happen to you tomorrow. Inside. Because I have been in rooms like the one we are about to be in, and I know what they do to a person. What do you mean, sir? I mean that tomorrow, for the first time in years, you are going to say the whole truth out loud in front of the man who taught you to keep it buried. And your body is going to fight you the entire time. Every instinct he built into you over these years is going to scream at you to stay quiet, to protect him, to protect the men, to make yourself small. Whitaker looked at her. I have seen soldiers freeze in that moment, Sergeant. Good soldiers. Brave ones. The bravest people I have ever known have frozen when the thing they had to face was not a bullet, but a truth. So I want you to know, before it happens, that if you freeze, if your voice fails you, if you cannot get the words out, it does not mean you are weak. It means the cage he built was very, very good. And I will be standing right there, and so will Reeves, and so will 4 men who owe you their lives. You will not have to carry that room alone. Do you understand me? Claire looked down at her hands. I have never said it out loud, General, she whispered. Not the whole thing. Not to anyone. I said pieces of it to you and the Colonel this week, but I have never stood in a room and said all of it from beginning to end, out loud where the words are real. I do not know if I can. You do not have to know, Whitaker said. You just have to show up. That is all anyone has ever had to do. Show up and let the people who love you carry the parts you cannot. You have spent your whole life being the one who carries things for everyone else. Tomorrow you are going to let us carry something for you. Consider that an order if it makes it easier. And Claire in the dark of the weapons bay almost laughed. You are a strange kind of general, sir, she said. So I have been told, Whitaker said, repeatedly, by people who outranked me and lived to regret it. Now go try to sleep, Sergeant. You are going to need it. She did not sleep, but she felt for the first time that she might be able to survive the morning. They began to arrive just after dawn. The first was the oldest of the 4, the retired senior officer Reeves had spoken to, and the moment he walked into the room where Claire was waiting, everything about the day changed. He stopped in the doorway. He was gray now, older than the young officer he had been 10 years ago, but his bearing was the bearing of a man who had spent his life in service and never quite left it behind. He looked at Claire Bennett, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything, because there are moments too large for words to fit inside. It was you, he finally said, his voice cracked on the second word. All these years, I built 100 faces in my head of who might have taken that shot. I imagined some grizzled old master sergeant, some legend I had never heard of. Never once, not one single time, did I imagine a 19-year-old girl. He shook his head slowly. It was you. Yes, sir, Claire said quietly. It was me. And this decorated old soldier, this man who had commanded troops and buried friends and seen things that would break. Most people crossed the room and took the young woman's hand in both of his, and his eyes filled, and he said the words he had waited 10 years to say. You saved my life. You saved all 4 of us. Do you know what I have done every day for 10 years? I have gotten up, and I have looked at my family, and I have known that none of it, not one single moment of it, would exist if some person I could not find had not made an impossible shot. I have raised a glass to you at every reunion. I have prayed for you without knowing your name. I have gone to sleep every night owing a debt I could never pay because I could not find the person I owed it to. His voice broke completely, and every door was locked. Every question was turned away. I started to think I would die without ever knowing why. Why would you let yourself disappear? Why would you let us believe we might never find you? Because a man told me I had to, Claire said. He told me that if I ever came forward, it would destroy you. All of you. He told me my silence was the only thing keeping you safe. And I believed him, sir, because protecting you was the only thing that ever made the shot bearable to live with. The old officer went very still, and then his face hardened into something dangerous, the face of a man who had just understood the true shape of something he had only seen in fragments. He told you, the old man said slowly, that your silence protected us. Yes, sir. Claire. He gripped her hand tighter and his voice shook. There has not been one day in 10 years that I have not wanted the whole world to know what you did. Not one. Your silence never protected me. It robbed me. It robbed all 4 of us of the chance to honor the person we owe everything to. Whoever told you that lied to you, and I am going to look forward to meeting him more than I have looked forward to anything in a very long time. You will, said General Whitaker from the doorway. In about 2 hours. He is coming back through that gate at 0900 expecting to find a frightened girl he can drag off my mountain. I do not think he has any idea what he is walking into. By 8 o'clock, all 4 of them had come. They came from 4 different corners of the country on flights booked in the middle of the night, and they walked into that room one after another, and each of them stopped when they saw Claire. And each of them had the same look on their face, the look of a man seeing an answer he had waited a decade to receive. The second man was quieter than the first. He did not speak at all for a long moment. He simply walked up to Claire and he studied her face as though he were trying to memorize it. And then he said, "I have a son. He is 8 years old. His name is after the man who did not make it out of the service, a friend of mine. And every time I say my own son's name, I think about how close I came to my boy growing up without a father." His voice was unsteady. "You gave me that. You gave me every bedtime story and every scraped knee and every parent-teacher conference. You gave me my son, and I did not even know your face." The third man could not speak at all. He tried and the words would not come, and finally he just took Claire's hand and pressed it between both of his and bowed his head, and the shaking of his shoulders said everything that his voice could not. And the fourth man, the youngest of them, looked at Claire and said in a voice full of a decade of held-back grief, "We used to talk about you, the 4 of us, at reunions, late at night. We called you the ghost, the shot that came out of nowhere and saved us and then vanished. We used to raise a glass to the ghost." His eyes were wet. "You are not a ghost. You are a person. You are a person who has been alive this whole time, carrying this alone while we drank to your memory like you were dead. I am so sorry. We should have torn the world apart to find you, and instead we let a man in a suit keep us from ever knowing." Claire stood in the middle of these 4 men, and something inside her that had been sealed shut since she was 19 years old began slowly to come apart in the best possible way. "I did not know," she said. Her voice was breaking now. "I did not know any of you wanted to find me. He told me you would want me to stay hidden. He told me that if I ever came forward it would hurt you. And I believed him because I could not imagine anyone wanting to find the person who did what I did. I thought if you ever learned it was me, you would look at me and see the thing that killed a man in front of you. I did not think you would see the person who saved you. I thought you would see the weapon." The oldest officer took her by both shoulders. "Listen to me," he said fiercely. "Listen to me very carefully, because I need you to hear this before that man walks through the door. When you made that shot, I did not see a weapon. I saw salvation. I saw the hand of God reaching down into the worst moment of my life and pulling me out of it. There is not one of us in this room who has ever for one single second thought of you as anything other than the reason we are alive. He told you we would see a monster. He lied. We see a hero. We have always seen a hero. And the only tragedy in 10 years is that we could not tell you so." He pulled her into an embrace, this old soldier and this young sergeant, and the other 3 closed in around them. And for a long moment, there were no ranks in that room, no years, no distance, just 4 men and the person who had given them back their lives, finally in the same place at the same time. Whitaker watched from the doorway and Reeves stood beside him, and neither of them said anything, because some things you do not interrupt. At 08:52, the black vehicle rolled through the gate. "He's here," Reeves said quietly. And Whitaker watched the change come over the room. He watched Claire step back from the 4 men and straighten. He watched the 4 men, without a word between them, arrange themselves around her. Not in front of her, not shielding her, but beside her, so that when Vance walked in, he would see her standing among them as an equal, as one of their own. He watched Reeves square his shoulders, and he watched the door. Gerald Vance stepped out of the vehicle with his briefcase and his gray suit and his smile that touched nothing, and he walked toward the building with the easy confidence of a man who had already decided how the morning would end. He had crushed people more powerful than a mountain general before breakfast. He had made colonels weep. He had taken a 19-year-old girl and built a cage around her so perfect that she had lived inside it for years and thanked him for the privilege. He expected the same today. He walked into the room and he opened his mouth to speak, and then he saw them. He saw the 4 men, and Gerald Vance, for the first time in the entire story, stopped smiling. "What is this?" he said. "This," said General Whitaker, "is the truth, Mr. Vance, standing in a room, all of it, in one place at one time, which I understand is the one thing you spent 10 years making certain would never happen." Vance's eyes moved across the 4 faces, and Whitaker watched the calculation happen behind them. Watched the man recognize, one face at a time, exactly who was standing in front of him, and exactly what their presence meant. And Whitaker watched something he had been waiting 3 days to see. He watched the confidence begin to drain out of Gerald Vance. "You brought them here," Vance said. His voice had lost some of its silk. "That was a mistake, General, a serious one. You have no idea what you have just set in motion." "I have a very good idea," Whitaker said. "But please, enlighten me. Tell me what I have set in motion. Tell me in front of these 4 witnesses and this colonel exactly what terrible thing happens now that the person you buried and the men you told her she was protecting are standing in the same room. Go ahead, Mr. Vance. Say it out loud. I would love to hear you explain your arrangement in front of the people it was built to deceive." Vance recovered the way men like him always do. He set his briefcase down on the bench and he straightened his jacket, and when he spoke again, the silk had returned. "You are all being very emotional," he said, "and I understand. Reunions are moving, but sentiment does not change facts, and the facts are these. The events of that day involve matters that certain very important people would prefer remain private. That has not changed. Whatever you feel about how the girl was handled, the underlying reality is the same. There are careers that depend on that day staying buried. And if the day comes into the light, it will not be me who suffers. It will be those important people. And it will be her and all of you for dragging it out." He turned to Claire and his voice dropped into the low, reasonable register that had controlled her for years. "You understand that, Claire. You have always understood it. That is why you stayed silent. Because deep down, you know that some truths destroy more than they save. You know that? You have always known that. Do not let these good men in the heat of a moment talk you into burning down more than you can rebuild." And here it was, the moment Whitaker had warned her about in the dark of the weapons bay. The moment where every instinct Vance had built into her over the years would scream at her to stay quiet, to protect them, to make herself small. And for one terrible second, Claire Bennett said nothing at all. Whitaker saw it. He saw her freeze. He saw the old training take hold, saw her body go rigid with the reflex of years, saw the words catch in her throat exactly the way he had told her they might. And he did not step in to save her because he understood in that moment that this was hers to win or lose, and that no one could win it for her. He simply looked at her, and so did the 4 men, and so did Reeves. And Claire Bennett looked at the 4 faces of the men she had saved, the men she had spent 10 years protecting from a threat that never existed, and she found at last that she was not alone in the room. She unfroze. "I understood it when I was 19, Mr. Vance," she said, and her voice was quiet and it did not shake. "I understood it because I was 19 years old and shaking, and I had just watched what a 50 caliber round does to a human being for the first time in my life, and you were the only calm thing in the room. You spoke slowly. You sounded so certain. And I was drowning, and I grabbed onto everything you said because there was nothing else to grab onto, and you knew that. You came to me in the worst moment of my life when I was too broken to think, and you built a cage while I was too grateful to be alive to notice the bars going up." "Claire," Vance said, "do not do this." "But I am not 19 anymore," she went on, and her voice grew stronger with every word, as though each sentence out loud made the next one easier. "And I have spent this week learning that almost everything you ever told me was a lie. You told me my silence protected these 4 men. It did not. It protected you. You told me the truth of that day would destroy them. It will not. Look at them. Look at their faces. They are not destroyed by the truth. They are set free by it. The only person in this room the truth destroys is you." She took a step toward him. "You told me I was a weapon, a capability, a thing to be stored on a shelf and taken down when needed. And I believed that too for years, because when someone tells you that you are a weapon, in the moment you are most afraid, it goes in deep and it stays. But I am not a weapon, Mr. Vance. I am a person. I made a shot at 19 that saved 4 lives, and I have never once been ashamed of it, and I am done. I am completely done letting the man who should have honored me convince me that I am something to be hidden." The room was utterly silent. "You cannot prove any of this," Vance said. But the silk was gone now entirely, and what was left underneath was something small and cornered. "We do not have to prove anything," Reeves said, stepping forward, and his voice carried the weight of a man who had finally, after years, found the thing he had been too afraid to reach for. "That is the part you never understood, Vance. You built your whole arrangement on one assumption, that the pieces would never come together. The operation which I held, the 5th man which Claire held, the paperwork which someone else held, the threat which you held over all of us. You made sure no one ever held two pieces at once. That was your entire architecture. Divide the truth into fragments and make sure the fragments never meet. Reeves gestured around the room at the 4 men at Claire at the general. Well, they are meeting now, right here. And I have spent this week writing down every fragment I know and every fragment Claire gave me and every fragment these 4 men have told me. And I have handed all of it to people who outrank you by a great distance. So you can stand there and pretend you still hold the cards. But the truth left your hands the moment these people started talking to each other. And the truth does not go back in the box, Vance. Not ever. You should know that better than anyone. You spent your whole career making sure of it. Vance looked from face to face, searching for a crack for a doubt for the single frightened person he could speak to and control. He did not find one. And Whitaker delivered the final blow quietly, the way the heaviest things are always delivered. I made some calls, Mr. Vance, the general said. Real ones. You told me on your last visit that your authority sat on a shelf my rank could not reach. So I found out whether that was true. And do you know what I learned? I learned that the shelf you sit on is not nearly as high as you told a 19-year-old it was. I learned that there is no lawful order binding Staff Sergeant Bennett to you. There is no classification requiring her silence. There never was. There was only a threat told to a traumatized teenager maintained for years through fear, and that Mr. Vance is not authority. That is a crime. And the people I spoke to, the people who actually sit on shelves that make yours look like a footstool, found it very interesting. Very interesting indeed. So here's what is going to happen now. You are going to pick up your briefcase. You are going to walk out of this room. You are going to get in your vehicle and you are going to drive off my mountain. And you are never going to come near this soldier again because there is nothing left for you to hold over her. The leash is cut. And a man like you, Mr. Vance, has no power at all once the leash is cut. You only ever had the fear, and she is not afraid of you anymore. For a long, long moment, Gerald Vance stood in the middle of the room and he looked at Claire Bennett, and Whitaker watched him search her face one last time for the thing he had counted on for so many years. The fear. It was not there. Where there had once been a drowning, 19-year-old grabbing onto the only calm voice in the room, there was now a woman standing straight and unafraid among the 4 men she had saved. And there was nothing in her eyes that Gerald Vance could use because he had built his entire power on her terror, and her terror was gone. He had lost her. He picked up his briefcase. He straightened his jacket one final time, a small, pointless gesture from a man who had run out of moves. And then he turned without another word because there were no words left that would work, and he walked out of the room and out of the building, and he got into his black vehicle, and he drove off the mountain. And every person in that room knew with total certainty that he was not coming back. Because a man like Gerald Vance is only powerful as long as the people he controls are afraid of him, and the one person who had been afraid of him for 10 years had just stopped in front of witnesses forever. The silence he left behind this time was not heavy. For the first time in the entire story, it was light. It was the lightness of a weight that has finally, after years, been set down. And then the oldest of the 4 men turned to Claire, and he did something no one had told him to do, something that came entirely from a decade of held-back gratitude, finally finding its release. He came to attention. And the other 3 came to attention beside him, 4 decorated men standing straight and tall in a row, and together they raised their hands and saluted her, a young staff sergeant, less than half the age of some of them, and they held the salute and they did not lower it. On behalf of 4 men who came home, the old officer said, and his voice was thick with tears he was not ashamed of. And every single person who exists because we came home, every wife, every child, every grandchild who is walking the earth right now because a 19-year-old girl did not let her hands shake on the worst day of her life. Thank you, Sergeant Bennett. We found you. After 10 years, we finally found you. And I swear to you on everything I have, we are never going to let you disappear again. Claire Bennett returned the salute, 4 fingers trembling against her brow, and she was weeping openly now, and she was not ashamed of a single tear, because for the first time in years, she was crying not from the weight, but from the absence of it. In the weeks and months that followed, the story of Claire Bennett never became a headline. There were no viral videos, no medals presented in front of cameras. The reckoning for what had happened 10 years ago was handled quietly by the kind of people whose job it is to handle such things, and the powerful men who had made a mistake and buried a girl to hide it found that their mistake had finally, after a decade, walked back into the light to meet them. Gerald Vance was never seen at Redstone Mountain again, and the arrangement he had built the cage that had held a hero for 10 years came apart at every seam. But other things quieter and far more important changed. Claire's file was unsealed, at least the parts of it that could ever be. Her commanders were finally permitted to know who they were leading, and the 4 men she had saved became the thing she had never allowed herself to believe she would ever have. A family that knew, a family she never had to lie to. They called her, they visited her on the mountain. The oldest drove all the way to Montana one afternoon just to sit with her and tell her in exact and loving detail about the granddaughter who existed because of her, a little girl who would grow up with a grandfather only because a teenager had made an impossible shot. And her mother could still never know the details. Some things stayed buried as they always must. But Claire drove home and she sat across the kitchen table from her mother. And when her mother asked the only question she had ever been allowed to ask in all these years, the same question she had asked into a silence she never understood, "Are you safe?" Claire, for the first time since she was 19 years old, was able to answer it without the truth being more complicated than the single word. "Yes, Mom," she said, "I'm safe, and I'm not carrying it alone anymore." And her mother, who had spent years asking that one small question into the dark, took her daughter's hand across the table and held it, and did not need to ask for anything more, because for the first time the answer had reached her daughter's eyes. As for General Thomas Whitaker, he went back to the work of commanding an installation. But everyone who served under him could feel that something in him had changed. He had always been a good commander. Now he was a different kind, a wiser kind, the kind who had learned the hardest lesson of his career in the space of a single week. He began telling a story quietly to young officers and new sergeants, and anyone he believed needed to hear it. He never used her name. He would never use her name. But he told them about a soldier he had once judged before he knew her, a soldier he had nearly destroyed on her very first day because she did not look like what he had decided greatness was supposed to look like. "The finest soldier I ever commanded," he would tell them, "was someone I grabbed by the shoulder and threw against a rack on the first morning because she was young and quiet and did not announce herself. I decided who she was before I did her the basic honor of finding out. And I was wrong in the worst way a commander can ever be wrong. So let me give you the only piece of wisdom I have that is worth anything after 34 years in this uniform. Greatness does not announce itself. Sometimes it stands silently in an armory, doing a job nobody notices, carrying a weight nobody in the room could imagine. And the entire difference between a good leader and a worthless one is not whether you can recognize the loud ones. Anyone can do that. It is whether you take the time to look closer at the quiet ones. Because the quietest person in the room is sometimes the one who saved 4 lives before most of us had our morning coffee and never told a living soul. Months later, on an ordinary morning, General Whitaker walked past the weapons bay where all of it had begun. And there she was, Claire Bennett, kneeling beside a rifle data book open beside her, doing routine maintenance in the quiet, unremarkable way she did everything. No audience, no recognition, just a soldier doing her job on an ordinary morning. But she was different now, and anyone with eyes could see it. The weight she had carried for so long, the invisible thing that had bent her shoulders even when her face was perfectly calm, was gone. She looked up when the general appeared in the doorway, and she smiled, and it was a real smile, an easy one, the smile of a person who had finally been allowed to become who she had always been underneath everything. "General," she said. "Sergeant Bennett," he answered. And this time he did not question why she belonged there. He did not wonder who she was, or where she had been, or what the number on her chest meant. He knew all of it now. And more than that, he finally understood the thing he had failed so completely to understand on that first freezing morning when he had shouted at a young woman he did not recognize. The greatest soldiers are not the loudest ones. They are not the ones who announce themselves or demand their recognition, or wear their courage out where everyone can admire it. They are the ones who carry impossible things in silence, who do the work that no one notices, who make the shot that saves the lives and then vanish without a single word of complaint. They are the ones who get doubted and dismissed and thrown against racks by generals who ought to know better and who absorb every bit of it without letting it turn them bitter, because somewhere along the way they decided that being good was more important than being seen. Claire Bennett was never just a sniper with a 3,200-meter badge. She was living proof of the one truth that General Thomas Whitaker would spend the rest of his life trying to teach anyone who would listen. That true heroes are almost never found by looking for fame. They are found by someone finally taking the time to look closer. And that the most extraordinary person you will ever meet in your life may be standing right in front of you, in a quiet room doing an ordinary job, waiting years, sometimes a lifetime, for one single person to care enough to ask the right question. Someone finally asked, and Claire Bennett was finally completely and forever seen.